It's just a fetus. That has been yelled at me so many times in college campuses. Hey, I'm Kristen Hawkins, President of Students for Life, and I'm your host for Explicitly Pro-Life with Kristen Hawkins. So today I want to talk about this phrase that gets yelled at me all the time. It's just a fetus, and it's usually at an end of a debate. It's out of exasperation of it's just a fetus, it's nothing, it means nothing. Is that really true? In the pro-life movement, we're pretty clear about why we believe that human beings shouldn't be ripped apart limb by limb, why we believe human beings shouldn't be induced with poison to cause cardiac arrest. Because we believe that human beings like you and I deserve dignity and respect, that every human being deserves dignity and respect. And no matter what argument you hear on campuses or, in your church or in your workplace for abortion, and usually the debate doesn't start out with, fetal development or it's just a fetus being yelled at you. Usually the debate of abortion will start off with rape. Questions of life of the mother, questions of, making it illegal won't make it, abolished. So, women will die from back alley abortions. Therefore, we have to keep abortion legal. Those are the usual comments and arguments of how abortion, when you're debating abortion, will start. But often, and every single time I've ever had a discussion about abortion, in-depth discussion about abortion, it always comes down to one point. Because you can address what happens during sexual assault. You can address the questions of life of the mother. You can address the, faulty information that Americans have been force-fed about what life was like in pre-Roe versus Wade America. But it always comes down to this question. The debates always come down to, what is it? What is inside of that mother? What is inside of her? Is what's inside of her a unique, whole, living human being that's never existed before and will never exist again? Or is it merely something that can be disposable? Is it a commodity? Is it just simply random tissue that can just be sucked up or torn apart? So today in my podcast, I want to just go through some fetal development facts. Things that you may not know, things that you might have heard, or maybe just to refresh you when you're having this discussion about what is it. First, I want to start off by showing you or having you listen, depending on how you're getting my podcast, which, by the way, make sure you're subscribing to my podcast. Everywhere podcasts are available, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. But the first thing I want to do is I want to show you a clip of me speaking at Dartmouth College 2 years ago. It was the first wave of my Lies Feminists Tell tour, and we had multiple protesters. There were maybe 10 pro-lifers in the room and about 100 pro-abortion students there who were angry. The clip's kind of funny because on the side of the clip, you can actually see my son Gunnar, who was 8 at the time, who was with me, and he's studying his Latin, a part of it, and then he's reading a comic book, so it's really kind of cute to watch. And you can hear people yelling at me in the background. They're just kind of unfazed by it. But what happened during the Q&A was I actually had to just explain the birds and the bees to these Ivy League students, these students that America tells us are the best and brightest. Because what we hear, and I remember hearing this even when I was in high school, right? And some of you who have gotten this debate on your own will have heard it of, pro-lifers, a sperm is not a human being, and an embryo and an egg is not a human being, and it's just a fertilized egg. And so in this clip, I actually explain how, parts versus wholes, how, a sperm is a part of a man's body, an egg is part of a woman's body, yet when they unite, something magical happens. Science shows us, right, that a unique, whole, living human being comes into existence that has half DNA from father, half DNA from mother. So take a listen to this. A sperm is a part of a man's body. An egg is part of a woman's body. When sperm and egg unite, they create a unique, living, whole human being that's never existed before and never existed again. A sperm is a part that can be used to create a whole living human being. but it's not full DNA. It's not a human person. Science tells us that sperm and eggs aren't persons, but a zygote, an embryo, a fetus is a human being, is a person that's never existed before and will never exist ever again, that has unique genetic code. Now, I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but clips like this one and other clips from my speaking tours on college campuses or other videos that Students for Life America puts out, make sure you use these videos. Put them on your Facebook or your Instagram or your Twitter. Use them as a way to start debate amongst your friends and your family about abortion. And for those of you who don't like controversy, I'm sorry, but that's your job. When you know the truth about abortion, you actually have to tell people the truth about abortion. So if you're not a big person who likes to start controversy, just post something that I say that's controversial, and then watch the debate ensue and kind of chime in every once in a while. Okay, so you heard me kind of just explain the birds and the bees to Ivy League students, but I want to start from the beginning. I've got medlineplus.gov pulled up here on my laptop. This is it's from the Library of Congress. This is a government website, thus the .gov. And there's a whole website, and it's just fetal development. And it just describes every single stage of a woman's pregnancy. And this is a non-biased source. This is a governmental source. So I thought this would be a great, website, medlineplus.gov, for you to use when you're having, conversation with family and friends about fetal development who just, quite frankly, want to ignore biology. And that's really what this is people don't want to acknowledge the fundamental truth, the scientific proof, what ultrasounds show us, what 95% of scientists agree on, that life begins at conception. And so one thing that's really interesting, before I go through Medline and kind of go through the stages of fetal development, one thing I think that's very fundamental here, and we'll hear this a lot of, it's just a fetus. It's just an embryo. The new term is now it's just a fertilized egg. A fertilized egg is not a human being. But if you go to Google and you type in fertilized egg, guess what comes up? Zygote, embryo. It's just semantics. It's another term. And the abortion left has been very smart in using and kind of adopting this term fertilized egg. Why? Because it makes it sound like this new human being is still a part of the woman's body because they're using eggs. They're using the word egg, which an egg is a part of a woman's body. But a fertilized egg is something entirely different, right? It's an entirely different new human being with a unique genetic code because it has DNA from father and DNA from mother. So this is kind of the crux of the debate. Often when you're on campus is really going to be, when does life begin? It used to be that everyone agreed that life began at conception, when egg and sperm unite and this new human entity comes into existence. That was when life began, conception. In the late 1960s, there was a movement from, ACOG, the American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists here in America, to change the definition of when life begins from conception to implantation. Because as you know, many of you know, conception actually occurs in the fallopian tube. The mother's egg is released when she is ovulating. Sperm during the sexual act enters the woman's uterus through the cervix, and the winning sperm penetrates the egg and creates this fertilized egg, this new human being. And that happens in the fallopian tube most of the time. And then this new clump of cells travels down the fallopian tube and implants itself into the wall, the uterine lining, where the child will remain, where the placenta will start to grow and nourish the child. And so this definition of when life begins was changed because of the birth control debate. Because we know some forms of birth control can prevent implantation by making the womb, the uterus, inhospitable to a new human being attaching itself into the uterine lining. This is also the case. This is needed for IVF because with in vitro fertilization, and many people don't know this or want to know this, human life is created in petri dishes. Those lives aren't implanted. Not most of them actually aren't implanted into the uterine lining of the mother. And so most of them are thrown away. They're donated for research or they're frozen. And so if you say that that's human life, that kind of sounds like you're a callous person, freezing human life or donating those human lives to be experimented upon that will result in the death, or just simply throwing them away. So this is really interesting. I actually went to Wikipedia this morning. Wikipedia, it's a millennial thing, I guess. But the British Medical Association actually redefined, what established pregnancy meant, and they said it's implantation. And so you saw as it happened here in America, and it happened throughout the world. What you really see, kind of this semantics play out, is with the use of Plan B. So as you all may know, Plan B is a big dose of birth control pills, of hormonal birth control pills. It's about 11 to 12 times more potent than a single birth control pill. So Plan B is sold everywhere, Walmart's. I'm always going to places and taking the Plan B off the shelves and hiding it, because Plan B can actually kill human beings. Now, it doesn't have to kill human beings, because Plan B, like a hormonal birth control, can just simply prevent ovulation from occurring, meaning it can stop the egg from being released from the woman's ovary, which that's not an abortifacient act, right? There's no human life that's been washed out of existence. And so on the back of Plan B, this is where it's misleading. So I was on a Reddit post today, and they were arguing about this, and they're clearly misinformed Americans. Our educational system, we need to do a whole podcast on our American educational system, is clearly failing people. But if you look on the back of the box, so I went to Google Images and I typed in Plan B back of the box. You can get the back of the box. On one side of the back of the box, it says, the sooner you take it, the more it'll be effective. Take as soon as possible, within 72 hours, 3 days after unprotected sex. Third point, will not harm an existing pregnancy. See? Not abortifacient. That's what they're arguing on Reddit. The back of the box said it. However, if you go to the right side of the box, where they talk about use, warnings, directions, and other information, all the black fine print. So if you zoom in, and I have to watch, I'm doing this with my mic. I'm going to have to lift up my laptop here. This product works mainly by preventing ovulation, egg release. It may also prevent fertilization of a released egg, joining of sperm and egg. Or, here we go, attachment of a fertilized egg to the uterus, implantation. Right there, at the back of the box on Plan B, it says it can be an abortifacient. Why? Because a fertilized egg is a human being. I can't say this, or I need like t-shirts for this. A fertilized egg is a human being. Fertilized egg, embryo, zygote, blastocyst, whatever you want to call it, fetus, it's a human being. In fact, we need to write that down. I need to make a new t-shirt. Just put on the different things, because that needs to happen. Right there on the back of the box, they actually admit, Plan B admits that it can harm an existing human life, because it will not allow the fertilized egg that's been, the egg that's been fertilized, that new human being comes into existence in the fallopian tube, from implanting into the uterine lining, meaning the child can't get the nutrition it needs to grow, causing an early abortion. There you go. I think my podcast is done. I've proven my point. But no, I'll keep going. All right, so please, when you're having these discussions, have an informed discussion. Read the entire damn box, okay? All right, so medlineplus.gov, fetal development. A couple new things that especially maybe men may not know is the first 2 weeks of pregnant, a woman actually isn't pregnant. The way we create, the weeks of your pregnancy, gestational age of the baby is actually measured from the first day of the mother's last menstrual cycle, because we don't actually know the exact date her egg was released or the day that egg was fertilized. And so when you always go to a doctor, you think you're pregnant, the first question they ask women is, what was the day of your last menstrual cycle? And if you're better than Kristen Hawkins, you'll probably know. Me, it's always a big wonder. I have no idea, because it's always a surprise, because I don't know. I just don't monitor it. So, be more responsible than me. Okay. So first 2 weeks of pregnancy start with the first day the woman's, she gets her period. So she's not pregnant and she's not fertile. The second week is when she is fertile. The egg will be released from the ovary, and that's the week that, most likely conception occurs. Week 3 is when, during intercourse, sperm enters the vagina, and guess what? New life begins. The strongest sperm wins. Sperm and egg meet in the fallopian tube. When the single sperm enters the egg, conception occurs. This is on the government website. The combined sperm and egg is called a zygote. Once again, don't be afraid of that word zygote. Just Google it. It says embryo or fetus. The zygote, from a government website, contains all the genetic information, DNA, needed to become a baby. Half DNA comes from the mother's egg and half comes from the father's sperm. The zygote then spends a couple of days traveling down the fallopian tube to implant itself into the uterine wall. During this time, it divides into form of balls of cells called a blastocyst. The blastocyst has an inner group of cells and an outer shell. The inner cells become the embryo, the development of the new child. The outer shell is what kind of will develop the membranes that will nourish the child. Once the blastocyst in week 4 reaches the uterus, it buries itself into the uterine wall. At this point, the mother should be having her period, which means the uterus should be thick with blood, and so it's ready to support a baby. The blastocyst sticks tightly to the wall of the uterus and receives nourishment from the mother's blood. All right, so week 5 is when actually you start the embryonic period. It's when all of the baby's major systems and structures begin to develop. There's blood cells, kidney cells, nerve cells. Those all develop. This is a rapid growth. In fact, there's a TED Talk I highly encourage you to watch. It's on the miracle of life, and this scientist talks about how quickly humans develop. And he at one point, I don't even know if he's religious, but he actually says in the TED Talk, like, this points to there has to be some divine intervention because of how fast the embryo develops into this child, right, that we all can recognize. Week 5, brain cells, the spinal cord and the heart actually all begin to form. The gastrointestinal tract begins to form. This is actually where the child is most at risk for, having something happen, damage that can cause birth defects. So if the mother's taking certain medicines, using illegal drugs, heavy alcohol use, infections, all that, the child is especially can be especially harmed during this really fragile state of time. Week 6 and 7, arm and leg buds start to form. The baby's brain has 5 different areas. The baby's heart continues to grow and now begins to beat, which, by the way, we have these fetal heartbeat bills that have been passed in Ohio and Georgia. And the new talking point from the left is not to say heartbeat. The Planned Parenthood will call it the 6-week abortion bans. There was some op-eds written recently of saying, call it cardiac fetal pole activity. So they're already trying to develop their semantics on that. Week 8, the baby's arms and legs have grown longer. Hands and feet begin to form and look like little paddles. The lungs begin to form. Also, this is on the website, but week 8, I've heard if the child is a girl, there's 2 genders, boy and girl. If there's a girl, all of the eggs that she'll ever have in her entire life, to be released during her menstrual cycles, all of the eggs she'll ever have in her entire life are already in her body at that point. That's fascinating. Week 9, hair follicles form. The baby's toes can be seen. All essential organs are growing. Week 10, the baby's eyelids have been formed and now can close. The baby's facial features are becoming distinct. The intestines rotate. Week 10 marks the change from embryo to fetus. Week 11 through 14, the baby's eyelids close permanently and will not reopen until the 28th week. The baby's face is well formed. Limbs are long and thin. Nails. The baby actually has fingernails and toenails. Remember that line from the movie Juno, where Juno goes to have the abortion and the young girl who's protesting the abortion facility, who she knows, saying your baby has fingernails. And that's what gets Juno, of like, oh my goodness. Genitals appear weeks 11 to 12. The head is very large, about half the baby's size. The baby can make a fist in weeks 11 through 14. Weeks 15 through 18, the baby's skin is almost transparent. Fine hair actually begins to form on the child's head. The baby can move and stretch. You can actually start around week 17, 18 to feel your child. Your baby can start making sucking motions weeks 19 to 21. So week 20 is like the big week for women who want to find out the gender of their baby, boy or girl, the two options. That's when you go in, you have the big ultrasound, and they scan for, they look at the chambers of the heart. They look to make sure, first they want to make sure there's no spina bifida, anything like that. And they'll tell you, if you want, the gender of your child, the sex of your child. That's a real big marker for most pregnant women. Your baby can actually hear weeks 19 through 21. The mom will definitely start to feel some fluttering, like butterflies fluttering. This used to be called quickening. So before 1973, especially in the 1800s, there were several bans that banned abortions after quickening, and that's when the mom can feel the baby's movements. By the end of this time, the baby can actually swallow. Week 22, meconium, the baby's first bowel movements, like that sticky black stuff that the baby poops out right after they're born, is made in the intestinal tract. Eyebrows and eyelashes appear. The baby is more active with muscle development. The mom can definitely feel the baby moving. The heartbeat can be heard now just with a stethoscope. Note, many states still allow abortions to happen at this week 22. And this is the one where when my friend David, was undercover with the Center for Medical Progress, he had talked to a former Planned Parenthood abortionist in Arizona who opened up her own abortion facility. And she was saying that, she had to go work out at the gym because crushing the skulls of the babies past 20 weeks was actually increasingly difficult. That's why the abortionists like to use digoxin, the poison that's inserted to the baby's heart to cause cardiac arrest, i.e. a heart attack, because it's less physical work on them. Weeks 23 to 25, bone marrow begins to make blood cells. The lower airways of the lungs are developed. The baby begins to store fat, those cute little chubby babies. Week 26, eyebrows and eyelashes are well formed. All parts of the baby's eyes are now developed. The baby can startle to loud noises. Fingerprints and footprints are formed. Weeks 27 through 30, the baby's brain grows rapidly. The nervous system is developed enough to control some body functions. The baby's eyelids can open and close. The respiratory system, while it's still immature, produces a substance that helps fill the lung air sacs with air. And this is really important. Once you get into weeks 30, the challenges for babies, for premature babies, which, by the way, completely destroy the argument for late-term abortion. If you've ever met someone who was born premature, that's usually the biggest challenge, right, for premature babies, is lung issues, not only when they're born, but when they develop and become older. And that's really, you want to give the child as long as time as possible to grow, because you want those extra weeks for that child's lungs to develop. I remember when I was pregnant with number 4, Gracie, we were living in Minnesota, so we didn't have any family, and I was terrified that I would go into labor early. And we wouldn't have any family. So my husband, I can't have my 3 kids at the hospital while I'm giving birth. And so I was like, what do we do? And so I had an emergency C-section with baby number 3, Maverick. So I said, well, let's just plan a C-section. I've already gone down this road. And by the way, it was actually an easier recovery. Some people say C-sections are worse, but it was easier for me. And so I was like, let's just plan this sucker. Let's get her out, and make sure we do it before my due date, so I can have my mom fly out and have people watching my children. And my doctor was like, you gotta wait till at least 39 weeks because we want to give your child lungs that time to develop. We have to do that. But that was really funny because I kept thinking, oh yeah, we've got to get we don't want to do anything that's going to harm our child. And by the way, that was a marvelous 3 days. I think all the time about, man, it would be great just to have another baby so I can get 3 vacation days. It was just me, my husband, and a baby. It was fantastic. I got to eat out. It was actually a lot of fun. It was calm and quiet. That's motherhood of 4 children. Weeks 31 to 34, your baby's gaining a lot of fat. like I said, the lungs are still developing. The bones now are fully developed. Weeks 35 to 37, the baby weighs about 5.5 pounds, keeps gaining weight. The baby actually has definite sleeping patterns during this time. The blood vessels are now complete, weeks 38 to 40. Fingernails can actually extend beyond fingertips. And that's actually true. When Gracie was born, she scratched herself up. Her fingernails were so long. We had to cut her fingernails. They were so soft. Right after she was born, I just kind of bit them off of her little finger because she was scratching herself. Week 40, that's the week that's the typical due date. So that's it. That is how human life, that's how each and every one of us was formed within our mother's wombs. All of us have this in common. No matter how many differences we have once we're born, we all have this in common. We all started this way. So when you hear that it's just a fetus, it's just a clump of cells, it means nothing. Now I think you have a lot of material to work with to say, yeah, sure, it's just a fetus, it's embryo, it's a zygote. It's just like how we once were. That's an important point, that you didn't come from a fetus. You didn't come from an embryo. You didn't come from a blastocyst. You once were one. That's where we all were, just like how we once were infants and toddlers and adolescents. It's just a stage of our life. But the stage of our lives, where we are in our lives, shouldn't dictate how valuable we are. We're all equally valuable simply because we are humans, because we are all members of the same human species. And it's a very slippery slope once we start saying that certain human beings are worth more, are more valuable, more deserving of life, more deserving of health care, depending on the stage of life they're in, or depending on their DNA code, or depending on their development. Because I have news for you. Women, we are a lot more developed than men functionally in our brain. Actually, men aren't actually fully developed in their brains until they're 25. Women are actually fully developed cognitively when we're 21. Does that mean that a 21-year-old woman is worth more, means more than a 25-year-old man? No, no one would actually argue that. My 10-year-old can do a lot more things than my 4-year-old physically. That doesn't mean my 10-year-old is more of a human being than my 4-year-old. No one would ever make those arguments. Those sound silly. They sound stupid. But those are the types of arguments we hear all the time on college campuses, the arguments we hear, sadly, in our churches and our family dinner tables. So don't let people confuse you. Don't let them manipulate you using these words, fertilized egg, to distance you from the humanity of the preborn. This is sadly what's been done throughout history in a lot of atrocities and genocides. Words were used to make you distance yourself and say, well, I'm not like them, right? In the Rwandan genocide, a whole group of people were cockroaches, and that was said over and over again. In Germany, we heard the Jews weren't full persons, and there were cartoon depictions of what Jews really were. We were told by our actual Supreme Court of the United States that black people, that people whose skin was simply different than ours, weren't real full persons. They were 3/5 a person. Supreme Court was wrong then, and they're wrong now. And don't let anyone tell you differently. So make sure you subscribe to my podcast, Explicitly Pro-Life. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll talk to you next week.